It began as a shadowed conversation in the private corridors of Kensington Palace, one that aides quickly hushed and courtiers carefully sidestepped. Meghan's icy glare as she left the room hinted at more than anger, it was shock. Something had shifted, and Harry had the key. What was first dismissed as speculation would explode into a royal showdown that insiders now confirm. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Whispers had circulated for weeks. Fragments of private exchanges leaked through palace administrative streams, ranging from treasury murmurs to security log anomalies, each hinting at a fracture in the carefully maintained fade of unity. Harry, always measured yet resolute, carried news that could unravel the delicate balance, a secret demand from King Charles, long hidden behind the ornate doors of the Red Box. Instructions that would test loyalties, provoke confrontations, and reshape allegiances within the Windsor firm. Meghan's aides, normally accustomed to navigating her emotional tides, struggled to contain her visible outrage, while Harry remained unusually composed, a sentinel of calm amid the brewing storm. Various interpretations of the meeting suggest that Meghan, feeling cornered by the weight of tradition and expectation, found herself in uncharted territory, a collision between Hollywood assertiveness and centuries of royal protocol. Security personnel noted irregularities in access logs and movement, subtle yet telling, that hinted at a larger narrative of secrecy and looming revelation. Insiders whispered that the tension was not simply personal but structural. The king's mandate threatened to redraw the invisible lines of influence, redistribute authority, and reassert the primacy of the crown over personal ambitions. Media insiders, observing from a distance, had suspected fractures, but nothing suggested the magnitude of what was unfolding behind closed doors. Conversations that seemed mundane in isolation, a reference to Frogmore Cottage, a comment on the succession letters, a passing note on the Duchy of Cornwall, suddenly revealed themselves as pieces of a more explosive puzzle. Reports suggest that the air in the private corridors was thick with unspoken challenges, each participant acutely aware that a misstep could have lasting consequences, not just for themselves, but for the legacy of the monarchy. As Meghan left, tension radiated in every measured step, every glance over her shoulder. Her disbelief was palpable, her shock intertwined with indignation. Harry's restraint contrasted starkly with her implosion, highlighting the divide between duty-bound loyalty and personal entitlement. The palace, usually a place of disciplined rhythm and controlled appearances, had become a crucible where the past, present, and future converged, forcing every player to confront truths long buried. Even those at the periphery, staff, advisors, and distant relatives, felt the tremors of a revelation that promised to reshape relationships and redefine the hierarchy of trust. Security logs and insider accounts confirm an unusual flurry of activity. Phone calls intercepted, memos circulated, subtle legal preparatory steps taken, all suggesting that the secret demand was no trivial matter. The atmosphere was dense with anticipation, a quiet storm building that none could ignore. And yet, despite the tension, Harry's clarity of purpose and measured delivery underscored his unwavering commitment to the king's instructions, creating a stark contrast with Meghan's rising frustration and visible implosion. But the chilling truth wasn't just about family disagreements. It was tied to a demand that struck at the very heart of royal legacy. Royal protocols have long been the fortress of the House of Windsor, but nothing prepared Meghan for the revelation Harry was about to share. A document buried within the Red Box, dating back to Queen Elizabeth II's final decrees, carried instructions that could redefine succession privileges and trust allocations. The Red Box, always a symbol of ultimate authority, had sat quietly on a polished mahogany table for months. Yet its contents now carried a weight that reverberated through the corridors of power. Reports suggest that the king's secret instructions touched on the distribution of titles and the management of estates long thought settled, including Frogmore Cottage and other personal holdings historically tied to the Sussex line. Letters patent and the meticulous 1,947 directives crafted over decades provided a framework so detailed, so exacting, that even the most experienced courtiers paused in awe and trepidation. Insiders whisper that Meghan's faction had misunderstood prior agreements, interpreting past allowances as freedoms they never truly possessed, a misreading that only intensified the shock of Harry's disclosure. The stakes were monumental. Framed in the cold calculus of duty over blood, the crown itself stood above familial desire, an unwavering sentinel to tradition that demanded obedience and foresight. Conversations leaked through palace administrative channels hinted at the ripple effects this revelation could have on the Sussex children, creating uncertainty over inheritance, ceremonial precedents, and long-term influence within the monarchy. As Harry carefully unfolded the red box contents, each page, each directive, underscored a principle that the monarchy could not bend. Legacy was sacred, and deviation carried consequences both subtle and severe. Reports from those closest to the corridors of power suggest a mixture of fear, disbelief, and reluctant recognition in Meghan's response. A recognition that her ambitions now collided with centuries of precedent. Every note, every instruction from the king seemed to carry an almost physical weight, pressing down on decisions, relationships, and loyalties, and revealing that even the most seasoned of palace actors could find themselves unmoored when faced with the full force of protocol and precedent. Sources close to the royal staff note that Harry, calm yet resolute, emphasized the importance of these directives as an extension of both his father's authority and the broader institutional mandate that supersedes individual preference. The room, heavy with tension, carried whispers of past misjudgments, of allowances taken for granted, and of the fragile balance between ambition and tradition. Some interpretations suggest that this moment was as much a test of character as it was a legal or ceremonial clarification, revealing who among the family could navigate the treacherous waters of authority without compromising the crown. And while Meghan struggled to reconcile personal expectation with imposed obligation, the historical weight of the king's decree loomed over every gesture, every word, every hesitation. This was not merely about inheritance or titles. It was a reckoning with the very principles that had governed the monarchy for generations. The red box, once silent, now dictated terms, demanding adherence to a lineage of trust, ceremony, and unassailable tradition. Every observer, from senior aides to distant courtiers, could feel the shift, a subtle but undeniable reminder that the monarchy's strength lay in obedience to duty, not the sway of individual desire. Yet, behind this historical weight, one act of betrayal would ignite the flames that Harry could no longer contain. Meghan, fueled by entitlement and years of Hollywood assertiveness, attempted to reinterpret the king's demands in her favor. It was an audacious move, one that violated centuries of protocol and left insiders gasping. Reports suggest that she orchestrated a series of private communications designed to circumvent the usual palace oversight, creating a labyrinth of emails, messages, and informal notes that blurred the line between personal preference and institutional authority. Her aim, according to sources close to the corridors of power, appeared to be the consolidation of influence and the securing of assets without proper royal consent. A maneuver so bold that it unsettled even the most seasoned advisors. Timing could not have been more sensitive. Early 2026, when King Charles's health was visibly fragile and the weight of tradition pressed harder than ever. Those familiar with palace routines describe tense confrontations in the private corridors, conversations that were brief, sharp, and laden with the unspoken understanding that every word carried the potential for lasting consequences. Harry, caught between loyalty to his father and devotion to his wife, maintained a careful restraint, aware of the public fallout that any misstep could provoke, yet silently registering each breach of protocol with an unflinching eye. Staff who witnessed these exchanges recount a palpable tension, an electric sense that something pivotal was unfolding, as if the very walls of the palace held their collective breath. The betrayal, though subtle in execution, was unmistakable in intent, a prioritization of personal gain over duty, a deliberate challenge to centuries of established hierarchy. Insiders whisper that Meghan's actions were not mere misunderstandings of procedure, but a strategic attempt to leverage timing and proximity to the king for advantage. A maneuver that risked destabilizing relationships across the family and testing the limits of the monarchy's patience. Even the most routine administrative channels were tinged with suspicion. Each memo, each adjustment in schedules or permissions read as part of a broader, calculated design. Harry, observing all, recognized the gravity of the situation. The collision between ambition and legacy was inevitable, and the consequences would ripple far beyond immediate intentions. Media commentators privy to leaks and palace murmurs speculated on the symbolic weight of these actions. The clash was no longer about property or titles alone, but about trust, allegiance, and the integrity of centuries-old traditions that had always defined the monarchy. Reports suggest that aides discreetly intervened, attempting to mediate without inflaming tensions further, yet the undercurrent of rivalry was unmistakable. And every participant understood that this confrontation carried both personal and institutional stakes. Meghan's assertiveness, while rooted in confidence in prior public victories, collided with the rigid architecture of royal expectation, revealing fault lines in perception, loyalty, and interpretation. Every move she made, each recalibration of messaging or engagement, seemed to be met with a counterforce: Harry's measured restraint, palace advisories, and the quiet vigilance of senior aides, ensuring that her audacity could not entirely escape scrutiny or consequence. The corridors of power, though silent to the public, buzzed with the reverberations of this internal drama, and every participant felt the invisible weight of the king's mandate pressing down on the unfolding confrontation. Harry's revelation would not just expose the betrayal, it would force a reckoning that could not be ignored. When Harry finally revealed the king's secret demand to Meghan, it was not a conversation. It was a courtroom in miniature, a battlefield of legacy versus ambition. The room vibrated with tension as palace aides held their breath, caught between protocol and the raw unfolding drama. Harry laid out the king's private instructions with meticulous precision, each word deliberate, each directive weighted with the authority of centuries and the silent mandate of duty. Meghan's face, a mirror of disbelief and fury, betrayed the shock that had been simmering beneath calculated composure, and aides scrambled desperately to maintain decorum, smoothing the edges of chaos before it could spill into the public eye. References to the Iron Protocol and the Heirs Accord punctuated Harry's disclosure, echoing through the corridors as more than mere phrases. They were doctrines, codified frameworks that demanded adherence, and highlighted the unassailable power of the institution. Insiders whisper that legal advisors from the Guardian faction moved with unusual speed, drafting and preparing measures that could enforce the king's mandate, creating an invisible web of oversight and accountability that left no room for misinterpretation. Staff who observed the proceedings recount meticulous documentation, every note taken, every copy logged, every signature checked against precedent, ensuring that the principles of succession, authority, and loyalty were indisputably preserved. Harry's composure, unshaken by Meghan's visible implosion, emphasized a commitment not to personal grievance but to legacy, a reminder that the crown's imperatives were larger than individual ambitions or momentary discontent. The tension was almost palpable, an electric charge coursing through the room as every actor understood that the stakes extended far beyond immediate confrontation. This was a defining moment where ambition collided with centuries of expectation, where missteps could fracture relationships and unsettle the carefully maintained hierarchy of the House of Windsor. Reports suggest that Meghan's attempts to interject, to reinterpret or challenge the instructions, were met with a quiet yet unyielding counterforce. The steady assertion of institutional authority reinforced by Harry's unwavering adherence to the king's explicit intent. The private corridors seemed to vibrate with the echoes of precedent and protocol, every whispered reminder of duty magnified against the backdrop of her rising frustration and the aides' frantic efforts to preserve order. It was a moment that left insiders breathless, a rare glimpse of the monarchy's internal mechanisms asserting themselves with clarity, precision, and an unspoken warning. Deviation from established mandate carried consequences that were immediate, profound, and meticulously enforced. Conversations that once seemed casual, about titles, trusts, and ceremonial precedents, now resonated with the weight of irrevocable decisions, illustrating how tightly interwoven personal action and institutional stability had become. Even in the midst of Meghan's implosion, Harry's control and calmness served as a reminder that loyalty to legacy demanded sacrifice, measured action, and recognition of the crown's primacy over personal desire. Advisors, aides, and observers alike could feel the gravitational pull of the moment, a confrontation where the truth of the king's will, codified through centuries of legal and ceremonial practice, could no longer be ignored or diluted by emotion or ambition. This confrontation would set the stage for a broader counteroffensive, one that would ripple through the corridors of power. The palace's inner machinery moved with precision, Once Harry disclosed the king's mandate, bureaucratic warfare erupted. Audits, revoked access, and social rebukes left Meghan's faction scrambling. Security badges, once casually granted, were frozen, and invitations that had symbolized privilege were quietly rescinded. A subtle yet unmistakable signal that the rules of the house had shifted irreversibly. Legal letters, meticulously drafted and delivered with the weight of precedent, enforced adherence to the king's demands, leaving no room for interpretation or delay. Insiders whisper that Meghan's children, caught in the crossfire of protocol and perception, found themselves in social limbo, their status suddenly questioned in ways that had been unimaginable just weeks before. Media outlets, from the Times to Tatler, conveyed a clear undercurrent. The party is over, and the Parker Bowles faction had lost its aura of influence, stripped of the unspoken privileges it had once wielded with confidence. King Charles, visibly drained from the weeks of orchestrating delicate balances between duty and family loyalty, stepped in to mediate, his presence a reminder of both authority and the human cost of these internal upheavals. Sources close to the palace note the subtle gestures, the careful interventions, and the quiet insistence that the crown, not personal desire, must prevail. Every action, from the activation of audits to the recalibration of access, reinforced a central principle: crown before family, duty over ambition, the old guard's influence restored through strategic vigilance. Even the smallest ripple, a rescheduled engagement, a curtailed social visit, a quietly withdrawn privilege, sent waves through the network of courtiers, signaling the firmness of the guardian's control and the meticulous enforcement of the king's will. Advisors, aides, and observers all sensed a shift in the palace's equilibrium. The delicate choreography of influence, once taken for granted, had been recalibrated with exacting precision. Whispers through administrative channels, leaks, and minor communications confirmed the broader consequences. The monarchy was reasserting itself, quietly yet unambiguously, signaling to all factions that compliance was mandatory and that deviation carried costs both visible and insidious. Even those accustomed to the ebb and flow of palace life paused, recognizing that this counteroffensive was not merely reactive but preemptive, designed to shore up authority, maintain hierarchy, and preserve the sacred trust inherent in the institution. As Meghan's faction grappled with the sudden loss of informal control, Harry and his allies observed with a measured vigilance, ensuring that every step of the enforcement adhered to both the spirit and the letter of the king's mandate. The corridors, once alive with hushed plotting and calculated maneuvering, now thrummed with disciplined efficiency, the machinery of the monarchy reaffirming its presence and asserting its timeless mandate. Yet, even as the palace stabilized, the lessons of betrayal would echo through the walls for years to come. Royal watchers and journalists alike sensed the tremors before the official statements. Every social appearance, every photo op, reflected the seismic shift behind closed doors, a subtle choreography of tension and restraint that spoke louder than any press release could. Coverage intensified across elite outlets, with the Times dissecting the procedural nuances, Tatler analyzing the social implications, and Robert Hardman providing insider commentary on the unfolding power dynamics. Public perception became a battlefield of its own, split between fascination with Hollywood spectacle and respect for centuries-old royal duty, each narrative pulling audiences in opposing directions, fueling debate, speculation, and viral discourse. Analysts and social media pundits dissected Meghan's implosion in real time, charting the arc of her emotional collapse against the backdrop of strategic palace maneuvers, while insiders whispered of careful orchestration behind every perceived misstep. The Guardian faction seized the moment, reinforcing the narrative of loyalty, transparency, and adherence to institutional principles, subtly reminding the world that the monarchy was governed by obligation, not personal ambition. Long-term reputational consequences for the Sussex family rippled quietly yet persistently, with courtiers, historians, and public commentators alike noting the widening gap between public perception and private influence. Every article, every headline, every viral clip underscored a central motif: the red box and the letters patent were more than ceremonial. They symbolized authority, continuity, and the immutable expectations that bound every member of the royal family to duty. Analysts speculated on the interplay between image and responsibility, how even minor deviations from protocol could become magnified across media channels, influencing perception and legacy in ways that reverberated far beyond the immediate scandal. Courtiers observed the patterns with a mix of satisfaction and concern, recognizing that the unfolding media storm was both a reflection and a reinforcement of the internal recalibration of power. Reports suggest that each editorial decision, each public post, carried with it a calculated weight, subtly shaping understanding of who held influence, who adhered to tradition, and who faltered under scrutiny. Meanwhile, Meghan's visible distress and the cascading social commentary became emblematic of the friction between modern celebrity culture and the immovable pillars of monarchy, a tension that captivated audiences and provoked debates across continents. The symbolism of documents, mandates, and centuries of precedent was amplified through the lens of media, transforming private decisions into public theater and creating a narrative in which duty, loyalty, and legacy were continuously juxtaposed against ambition, emotion, and spectacle. Every observer, from palace staff to global audiences, could sense that the stakes extended far beyond a single confrontation. This was a defining moment in how the monarchy managed its image, authority, and future succession. The narratives intertwined, the headlines multiplied, and yet behind it all, a quiet order persisted, reinforcing principles that would govern actions, loyalties, and expectations for generations to come. As whispers turned to headlines, the monarchy prepared to fortify its boundaries for the next generation. In private corridors, silence replaced outbursts. Meghan withdrew, recalibrating, while Harry maintained loyalty to both his father and the institution. The lessons of the king's mandate resonated quietly but powerfully, like echoes reverberating through walls that had witnessed centuries of protocol and power. Meghan's retreat was calculated, a recognition that open confrontation would achieve nothing against the weight of tradition and the resolute clarity of the king's instructions. Harry, by contrast, continued to advocate for duty over personal agenda, his movements measured, his decisions guided by loyalty rather than impulse, a sentinel ensuring that the crown's prerogatives were upheld even amid the turbulence of family discord. King Charles, visibly regaining composure after weeks of strain, stepped forward to assert ceremonial authority, reaffirming the boundaries between personal sentiment and institutional mandate, reminding all present that the monarchy's strength relied on continuity, stability, and the quiet enforcement of its rules. Princess Anne and Prince William observed from the periphery, vigilant and poised, ready to intervene if any deviation threatened the delicate balance that had been painstakingly restored. Their presence a silent affirmation of the Guardian's oversight and unwavering commitment to legacy. Within the palace, staff reported a calm yet vigilant atmosphere, a subtle tension that marked the difference between mere order and disciplined oversight, where every action was noted and every reaction gauged, ensuring that the lessons of recent upheavals would not be forgotten. Enforcement of the king's mandate became an exercise in subtlety and strategy, a demonstration of power exercised not through spectacle but through meticulous control, quiet oversight, and the reinforcement of principles that would outlast any individual grievance. The interplay of retreat and resolve, of measured restraint and strategic observation, created a rhythm that emphasized the monarchy's resilience, illustrating how authority could be maintained without unnecessary confrontation, and how loyalty and duty could guide decisions even in emotionally charged circumstances. Observers note that Meghan's recalibration, though personal, sent a message to all factions. Challenges to the crown's mandate would be met not with immediate spectacle, but with patient, deliberate, and enduring correction, a reminder that legacy cannot be hurried or coerced. The palace itself, from its echoing halls to its meticulously guarded archives, seemed to absorb the lessons of this confrontation, becoming both witness and participant in the reinforcement of principles that had governed the House of Windsor for generations. Harry's steadfastness and Meghan's cautious withdrawal set a template for how ambition, emotion, and duty would coexist within the family, tension balanced by discretion, authority tempered by tradition, and personal desire subordinated to the institution's enduring needs. As murmurs of past conflicts faded into routine vigilance, the monarchy's internal equilibrium gradually reasserted itself, a quiet assertion of continuity that was as much about perception as it was about enforcement. Every glance, every carefully managed interaction, carried the weight of precedent, a reminder that the crown's authority is both timeless and immediate, shaping behavior, loyalty, and consequence in equal measure. The final act would cement the monarchy's enduring principles, even amid personal upheaval. The crown had survived another trial. The king's secret demand, once revealed, had safeguarded tradition and reasserted the sacred geography of the British monarchy, a subtle yet unmistakable reminder that authority and legacy are never negotiable. Slowly, the palace restored its internal equilibrium, the delicate tension that had threatened to fracture relationships giving way to measured calm and disciplined adherence to protocol. Clear precedent emerged, not merely as rules on paper, but as living instruments guiding succession, asset control, and compliance, ensuring that every action taken reflected centuries of accumulated wisdom and careful governance. The moral of this chapter was simple, yet profound. The crown is a sacred trust held on behalf of the nation, not a family business. This principle resonated quietly but powerfully, reinforcing that personal ambition must always bow to institutional integrity, and that loyalty to duty supersedes individual desire. Legacy was safeguarded through meticulous documentation, every memo, letter, and directive filed with precision, forming an invisible shield against future misinterpretations or overreach. The red box, still gleaming on its polished surface, along with letters patent meticulously archived, stood as symbols of continuity, of order preserved through vigilance. Their presence a constant reminder that the monarchy's strength rests on respect for both history and procedure. Corridors once alive with tension now echoed only with the disciplined rhythm of duty, a calm so profound it seemed almost icy, yet it carried a weight heavier than any argument or confrontation. Every member of the household, every aide and advisor, understood that this restoration was not simply about peace of mind, but about ensuring that the monarchy's principles endured, that chaos would be tempered by law, and that personal grievances would never again eclipse institutional necessity. The balance between power and restraint, between authority and compassion, had been re-established, and in this measured silence, the crown's mandate was reaffirmed, its reach unchallenged, its future secured. Even as whispers of previous disputes faded into memory, the lessons endured, that vigilance must never waver, that duty must always guide action, and that the monarchy's sacred trust extends far beyond the private ambitions of those who serve it. The saga of confrontation, revelation, and reconciliation left a lasting imprint on the palace, a quiet testament to the resilience of tradition, the triumph of order over chaos, and the enduring authority of the crown itself. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.